Hi, I'm Mark Randolph, co-founder of Netflix and 6 other companies. Over the years, I've heard that will never work thousands of times, but I've learned there are things we all can do to increase the chances that they will. So join me for That Will Never Work. Hey everybody, and welcome to That Will Never Work. My guest on today's show has an interesting question. Is it possible to have a real business where you only work 6 months a year? Well, isn't that something all of us would love? His name is Matt Keane. He has a UK-based company called Frightmare. It's basically one of those fright factories where around Halloween, you pay good money to have your pants scared off you. The business is doing great, but he doesn't want to be there full time. Is it possible to run a business 6 months a year? What about your employees? What about culture? I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. So stick around. Hi, Matt. Welcome to That Will Never Work. I'm excited to chat with you because in some ways, I think you're kind of living the dream life. But rather than me explaining what that is, I think I'm going to let you tell everybody what I'm talking about. So why don't you give me a sense of what your business is, how it's going, and then maybe you could kind of gracefully segue into whatever it is you want to talk about today.
Yeah, of course. So reference to the dream life. I'm currently sat in the foothills of the French Alps in an RV, as you guys like to call them, a motorhome. I've spent the last 3 months skiing all around Europe. I've been as far as Macedonia, North Macedonia, way in the east, and everywhere in between here and there. So I'm having a great time. Now, what's I'm hoping to allow me to do that is my business called Frightmare, which is a Halloween festival, which you'll be very accustomed to in the US. But essentially, we fill a building or a venue space with multiple haunted houses and put lots of audience members through with a couple of hundred actors and try and scare the crap out of people, really. That's what I do for a living.
Well, it sounds like you do it for a living, but do you do it for a living full time? I mean, you're in an RV, you're traveling around Europe skiing.
Well, that's what I'm kind of coming to ask you for advice about. So up until now, I've been working in a full-time family business. The opportunity has arisen for me to take this Halloween brand out solo, and I need to determine whether I can make it work on a, I guess, part-time basis, as it were, in that I know the revenue it generates is sufficient enough to sustain my lifestyle. But how does that impact the culture of the business?
So before we jump into with a specific question I think you're asking, which is about how is it possible to kind of have it all, let me get a bit better of a sense about the business. So when you referred to you've been in a family business, was Frightmare the family business, or were you in something completely different and this was a sideline?
So it was, my dad's a fantastic human, always got the next big idea. We are from a farming background, which was traditional farming until the early 80s. He came to the States, and a lot of this involves him coming to the States actually and picking up ideas from there. So he came there in the early 80s and saw kind of the market stands, the roadside shops popping up for fruit and veg growers to sell their wares directly to the consumer. And he set up a farm shop in the UK, which was probably one of the first in the UK at the time. And everything off of the back of that has really stemmed us to driving customers into that farm shop. And generally that happens because of year-round events and seasonal events. And so the Frightmare brand was kind of a spin-off from that.
So in other words, when the corn is growing, you have the corn maze. And in the spring, you go, let's do the Easter, decorate the chick eggs. And in other words, basically, this is a man who knows how to promote ways to get people to come to the farm stand, and scaring the crap out of them, as you put it, was the fall focus. But I'm gathering that corn mazes and Easter egg hunts didn't captivate you quite the way scaring people did. And so did you were drawn to, let me guess, making the Frightmare piece of it bigger and even more elaborate, and it kind of took on a life of its own?
You've got it. Yeah, exactly. So I took over properly about 10 years ago and really grew it from there. There was, I can't remember the exact numbers. There was around 1,000 people coming to it then. And it's grown now to in excess of 15,000 people over the course of a few nights.
So what are the scary things that you do? I mean, do you have hire people to jump out and grab people's ankles, or are there, is there a formula, I guess, for making something scary, or is this just you indulging your crazy creativity?
I guess it's a bit of both. As I mentioned, they're different attractions, and so we try to target different people's phobias in different ways. So one of the attractions, for example, is based on Wonderland. So it's all UV. You get a pair of glasses, which turns everything 3D. And then, yeah, within that, there's different actors that are all dressed up as different characters. You've got the Mad Hatter and you've got a Twisted Alice and that sort of thing. We actually operate, and a large amount of the operators in the UK operate a no touching policy, just because of legal issues and things like that.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's scary from a whole different perspective. That's like, yeah. It scares lawyers, so everyone gets scared when there's the touching part involved. Okay, so is this something that truly sits fallow, or are there some people who are working on this 11 and a half months a year?
Well, my thought process never stops, and certainly there's been stuff I've been thinking about whilst I've been on this trip. Yes, this is going to be the kind of interesting transitionary period, in that with the farm setup, I had all the bells and whistles. We had a HR department, we had people doing social media and all that sort of thing. Now, maintaining that is going to be difficult if we shut everything down for 6 months, say. So yeah, ideally I'd have, for the scale we're at the moment, I'd need 3 team members to really make it happen. And then of course, associated contractors when it comes closer to the time.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, does this require you finding 3 other people who only work 6 months a year? Or is this basically saying, I want all of you to work a full-time job while I go off gallivanting?
Well, herein lies the conundrum, I guess. So this is the biggest part of it for me, is how can I expect a team to still be working whilst I'm gallivanting, as it were?
Okay.
However, and equally, if for 6 months a year people are laying fallow, as it were, it's quite likely that I'm going to lose 1 or 2 every time, and I don't have that much hair left as it is. I don't really need to be finding 2 more key team members every season, as it were. So,
okay. I think I have a pretty good sense of what's going on here. And so first of all, I do have to commend you, and I referred in the intro to the fact that you're living this dream life. And I think what you are aspiring to do is unbelievably cool. And I think, who would not want to do that? And I have very specific way to relate to this, because when I was running one piece of marketing for this big software company, this is probably 25, 30 years ago, a woman who was running the other piece of marketing for this business, her and I would fantasize about this exact same thing all the time, which is, how can we set this up so that one of us is here all the time, one of us is here and the other one's not, and then we swap. And we were getting down to trying to figure out, well, do we each work 8 months a year. So we each have a 1 month overlap at each end to basically transition. So there's two of us, we had this whole thing worked out. And of course, it ended up being nothing but a fantasy. I also have these good friends. It's a couple, and they have a construction company. And they have partners in the construction company who are another couple. And they go 6 and 6. And they also make this fantasy even more. Listen, you've got an RV. They have a big 46-foot or 64-foot sailboat, which is docked somewhere in the Mediterranean, and they take turns spending 6 months working in the town where I am, and then they swap, and the other couple goes to the boat, and they go back and forth every 6 months, and they did that for 20 plus years. So in other words, the model that you have in mind is not a unreasonable one at all. Really, really hard to pull off by the fact that so few people manage to do it, or at least manage to do it without everybody thinking you're just a bum. And, the working part is not serious, that you're really doing that other version where basically you go and work on the oil rigs for 3 months, make enough money where you can not work the other 9 months, which is also legitimate. But let's come back to your particular scenario. The first thing is I would be looking at is there a way for me to make this work structurally? And I was trying to dig in to try and understand this before, so I'm going to go back to it a little bit. Could the business run with only 6 months worth of attention? Meaning, is it possible to say, no, my social media person only works 6 months. My whoever it is only works 6 months. In which case, then the formula is basically this is a job for somebody who really is looking for this gig where they only work 6 months a year. Or does it require that there be full-time employees because this it takes 11 months to prep for it to run in October?
That's a great question. And whilst, yes, for the large part, 6 months a year is achievable, inevitably there's always people making contact and stuff, out of season, people with tickets that they didn't use or things like that. And whilst you can automate a lot of social media now, obviously the ball court is forever changing. So you can schedule all these posts and then suddenly it's all inaccurate information. So in theory, yes, we could do it exclusively for 6 months. I don't know if that would be detrimental to the brand though.
So, and maybe it would, but tough. It's all in service of a higher purpose, which is, can you live the life you have? In other words, the general approach, the first one I would try. We'll come back in a minute to how do you do the cultural piece the other way. But the first thing I'd be looking at is there a way for me to structure this business in a way that everyone works 6 months, or most of us work 6 months, and then what you're doing is saying, I'm hiring for that. And rather than having this thing where, oh my gosh, I have to lay people off, and now I've got to go about finding people again who actually understand what's going on. You go, no, we're going to find people who share my sense of values, which is, I don't want to be working all year. And they can structure it. You can have your employees structure it the way you want. I mean, you could say, for example, this is a 12-month gig where 6 months of it is going to be 50-hour weeks, and 6 months of it is going to be 10-hour weeks. And those 6 months, this 6 months, I need you to live, come to the office, because we're going to be going, maybe it ramps up. Maybe they're 70-hour weeks for the last 2 months of the summer. And the rest of the 6 months, I don't care where you are, but you're going to have things to do to keep in other words, you start from scratch saying, knowing what I know now about this business, knowing what it takes, knowing the seasonality of it, knowing the things that have to be kept running, how would I design these jobs so that people could do them living the way I do? And then you shift it around and say, I'm going to hire for that. And maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect it would not be hard, especially after the last 2 years where everyone's gotten a taste of this working remote thing, to find people who would love nothing more than know that I can go live in Tahiti I can get out of the UK in the winter and go live in Tahiti and know that when I come back in April or May, I have a job and that don't have to basically work an entry-level job my whole life. So one approach. And if you can structure it that way, then you've aligned it all. There's a company, and gosh, I may get this entirely wrong. I think it's Expensify, which has this policy of the entire company goes and works remote for, I think it's a month. And everyone goes, all the employees, including spouses and kids and family, and they go to some different part of the world every year and they work remote for the month. And they make that work because people actually see that as a huge perk to get to live in different parts of the world, but yet still have the intellectual engagement, not to mention the paycheck, of a real job. Okay, so that's kind of Mark's advice number one, is see if you can set this up in a way that people are all dug in. And perhaps, yes, you may have one person who says, no, I'm totally content. I can't leave, my wife or my husband, my partner is here. I can't take off. That's fine. And they do work the 12 months a year. And certainly you've probably figured out ways to stay in touch sufficiently to keep that going. But I guess the key is setting the expectations at the beginning that this is not a normal job where the head of the company goes absent. This is a job which has been built for people who want to have a life. And we all enjoy the fact that we can take 4 to 6 months off a year and go skiing. So that's number one. Let's talk for a second about the second piece. And my question, which is, how do you say, no, I'm going to have regular employees and I'm going to be gone? How long have the people who work for you, have they worked for you?
I'm starting from scratch. So I'm really lucky in that aspect that I've got the chance to sort of build this culture from the ground up. So from day one, it's kind of up to me which way I go with it, which is great.
So the challenge, of course, and this is something I've said many times before on this podcast and elsewhere, is that when it comes to culture, unfortunately, culture I'm not sure. Culture is observational rather than aspirational, as I say. In other words, that the way you impart culture is people watching you and seeing how you behave, how you treat your vendors, how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, how you make decisions, how you make trade-offs. And by watching you, that sends the message about what is the culture, as opposed to read this little culture deck that I wrote and behave that way. That doesn't work so well. And so to the degree that you say, I want to have this culture and I want to really have it be consistent and have it be a certain way, even though I'm not going to be there, in that case, the cleverness has to go into, how do I make sure people see this and understand this? And let me ask you a question, back up a little bit. So when you're gone for your walkabout, do you work at all? Do you call in? Do you check in on things? Or do you shut everything? Is it go completely fallow?
No, I can I do like to stay in touch. And I think that would be really important with bringing the team on board as well. So it's funny that the first suggestion that you were saying about is something I've really strongly considered. And kind of having a keep in touch day or 2 days a week where we're all, I guess, remotely working, but we're all working, is great until there's a powder day or the surf swells up, or which is the only time that I'd kind of probably move away from that slightly. But yes, the maintaining contact would be really important. And I think it's good for me as well to stay engaged with what's going on, for myself more than anything, to stay a bit within the business, I suppose. It's hard to get complete separation, I think.
So I'll give you, so first of all, I think this is entirely doable. I really do. And you need to do this. And I don't just mean for your own well-being. You have to be the poster child that this is possible. I mean, so many messages get sent that are the opposite, that you've got to work and you've got to get a job. And especially here in the United States, where we have this obscene policy of 2 weeks of vacation a year, that is just nuts. But even in, I guess UK is 4 weeks, Germany is 5, Italy or France, sometimes 6. Even that, listen, you're getting 26. So, gosh, you got to show everyone it is possible to do it. So I'm rooting for you, and it is possible. So culturally, the way to make that work is you have to build a culture where you are not the decision maker. You have to build a culture where you are not the person who does everything. Because obviously, then if you're going to be the decision maker, you better be around to make decisions. If you're going to approve stuff, you better be around to approve it. If you are a critical path, you have to be around to be the critical path. Normally, the other thing I lay on people when I'm talking about culture, besides it's observational, so people are going to watch how you do it, is that culture is personal, that it is not one size fits all. So it's extremely rare that I tell someone, here's a kind of culture that if you're going to make what you want to make happen, you have to do it this way. But I have to do it in this case. It will only work with you gone so much is if you figure out a culture that does not depend on you being part of the process. And I happen to know of a company which actually works like that. It rhymes with Betflix. And for a long time, that company has set itself up that, as I've also said before, where the role of a manager, whether that's the CEO all the way down to even a line manager, is basically these two things, which is, are the right people in the right seats, and do all these people have all the information and context to make their own good decisions? Noticeably absent from that description is make decisions. Noticeably absent from that description is check on the decisions they're making. No, if you have the right people who have good judgment and you give them all the information they need about what your objectives are, about how this needs to work, about what's important, about what the competition is doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're empowered to make their own decisions, and they're closest to the things they have to make decisions about. And they can do that. And that does not require constant check-in. It allows people to work independently. And it has this additional benefit. Besides freeing up the CEO of the company from having to be engaged in every single decision, it puts the decision-making closest to the customer. It puts the decision-making closest to the information required to make that decision. And in Netflix's case, that largely comes down, for example, it comes down to things like approving which movies get made, what television series get bought. And that's not being made by the CEO or the head of content or the head of contents, directors of content. It's way, way down. They're empowered to make decisions. And the last little piece on this is that, Reed Hastings, who's the current CEO, co-CEO of Netflix, he has this basically objective of himself, which is how long can he go without making a decision? And it's measured in weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, without making a decision. Because not only does that allow him to free up to be thinking about more long-term strategic issues or leave, but it also tells him he's doing an effective job about having the right people in the right seats and giving them all the information and context they need to make decisions. So in your case, as you're building this culture, it's going to have to be something that does come naturally to you because you're not going to be able to fake it. But if you begin to say, I'm hiring someone not to do my bidding, not for me to tell them, here's how to do it, and check in with me, and when you get to something tricky, I'll make a decision. No, you got to pick someone who has the judgment and the trust that you think I can empower this person to do these certain areas I need done. And we're going to be clear on what the objectives are, and I'm going to leave them alone. I'm going to check in, but you're going to check in every 10 days, every week, every 2 weeks. And listen, if there's an emergency, for God's sake, you're not going to be off the grid for trekking to Antarctica. Well, maybe you are. Well, if you are, bring a sat phone. But in other words, this is not like you're going, I'm going to the bottom of the ocean for 6 months. If a real crisis, yeah, call me, for God's sake. But let's see how long we can go without me having to make a decision for you. In other words, you can do this. I really think you can do this, Matt. And you have to do it for all of us who worked 50 grueling weeks a year in order to get our time off. I mean, listen, I will say I'm one of the amazingly lucky people. So I count my blessings every single day that for the last 15 years, 20 years, I've had a lot of control over my life like you, and I can go off for 2 weeks and stuff like that. But I want everybody to have that. I want people who are in their 20s and their 30s to be able to do that. I want people who are, to take take your kids, take your husband, take your wife. The best things I ever did pretty much as a person, as a family, is my wife and I lived in Paris for 1.5 years. Then we took our whole family and we lived in Italy, for 1.5 years. The one in Paris, I had a job. In other words, I love what you're doing and I really want you to succeed at it.
Thank you.
And what scares me is those $250 a day lift tickets. Now that scares me. So if you could figure out a way to import that back to your thing, you would have a winner. So Matt, am I off? Sure. Am I on base here? Does this make any sense? Am I just spouting off, or do you think this actually is something you can pull off?
It definitely sounds like something I can pull off. In fact, the stuff that you said later on about empowering people is something that's already immersed in what I'd call the live event culture already. In that we've got some amazing members of the team who when we're live, my job is to stand at the bar and stuff happens and I don't even know that it's happened. And there's been an incident, first aid, security it's been logged. I've had nothing to do with it. And someone says to me, "Oh, did you hear about that?" No, not a clue. So that's actually really encouraging because I know how to do that. I know how to separate myself from the immediate decision making. So yeah, that's certainly transferable.
And what's really cool is that by staying away for 2 weeks, rather than abdicating some responsibility for culture, which is almost what you were saying at the beginning, you're reinforcing the culture. You are observational. You're saying this culture is built on trust. This culture is built on empowerment. And I'm going to demonstrate that that's not just bullshit. That's not just a poster in the break room. I'm going to demonstrate that we really do believe in trust and empowerment. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. It's a perfect fit and a perfect win. You can be consistent and you can go surfing and skiing at the same time. And wow, that is a win-win.
It's exciting.
All right, Matt, you've got normally I say I want to check in with someone in 6 months or so, but no, this takes a bit longer for you. You have to go through a cycle or two before we get a chance to check back in and tell me how this worked. Tell me what the anxiety levels were like when you were off the grid watching someone else making decisions on your behalf. And tell me how it felt when you came back and all of a sudden we're in somebody's grill after they'd been empowered to make decisions, and now you had to step back even though you were right there in the next room. Lots of stuff for us to dissect when we talk again.
I'm excited, really excited.
And so the last thing, just to make sure I really can go away from this thing feeling nauseous, where are you off to next?
Unfortunately, I'm nearly done, so I'm hanging around in the French Alps for another week, and then I've got to get back. I've got a family commitment to get to.
So, and do you surf part of the time too? Or is that just you just toss that off?
I think that's going to be next winter.
Pretty soon you're going to be down to, Mark, I'd like to spend maybe 3 weeks back in the UK, right before, right, and then I'm back out again. All right.
Yeah,
listen,
sure.
Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me about this. Good luck, and show us all it's possible. And that would be a huge contribution to mankind.
For sure. And thank you very much to you and your team for all of this information you're giving up for free. It's been awesome.
My pleasure, Matt. All right. We'll check in later. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow. Who wouldn't want that? A chance to build and run a real business and have 6 months to ski every year. Sign me up. But listen, if you've got a work-life balance challenge you want to talk about, I'd love to have you join me on the show. Simply come to markrandolph.com/guest to apply.